going on, guys? And today we talk about something differently. Not Destiny, but instead Battlefield 1. Now, Battlefield 1 is a fantastic game. The only problem with it is it doesn't quite capture exactly what World War 1 was. But if that were the case, you probably wouldn't have as much fun, because World War 1 was literally about getting your head blown off as soon as you step foot into no man's land. Trench warfare. And much in this channel's fashion, we're going to talk about stories. Stories of World War 1. Technically the lore, but this is actually real life, so it's history. Now, World War I, or the Great War, or the War to End All Wars, whichever one you would like to call it, was not particularly the greatest war. It started out with high hopes, though. It's one of the weirdest things about this war, is that in the beginning, most people were actually excited to go to war. Before that, the tactics they used were last seen of Napoleon. This was cavalry charges. This was using your swords, not so much guns. There wasn't really much guerrilla warfare. It's very organized. That quickly changed. It changed into digging up trenches and having to blow a whistle and over-the-top charges. Again, with trying to get as much people forward as possible. However, this was a way of getting the most people to die for little coverage and little pushes. If anything, they would probably capture a whole 10 feet over the course of a couple of weeks. It was not a very productive way of doing things, and that's the only way they knew how to do things back then, because the war was changing. Guns became more accurate. There was machine guns to mow down people. There was gases. That's enough about the overview of World War I. Today we're going to be talking about a hero story. This was the man known as Alvin York. Maybe you've heard of him, maybe you haven't. Alvin York, or Sergeant York, was born on December 13th, 1887. He's one of the most decorated soldiers in the United States Army in World War I. He received the Medal of Honor. He led an attack against the German machine gun nest. He took 35 machine guns. He's killed at least 28 German soldiers and captured 132 others. This is the guy that you probably want to be in Battlefield 1. And his stories do prove that it's almost straight out of what you would see in Battlefield 1, but actually was accomplished in real life. His famous story begins under the command of Sergeant Bernard Early. He was given the orders with 13 privates to infiltrate the German lines and take out the machine guns. These machine guns have been taking out a lot of their soldiers, and they need to get rid of them quickly. The group worked their way behind the Germans. They overran headquarters of a German unit. They captured a large group of German soldiers who were preparing to counterattack against the US troops. Early's men were contending with the prisoners when machine gun fire suddenly prepped the area, killing 6 Americans and wounding 3 others. The fire had come from a German machine gun on the ridge. The loss of the 9 put Corporal York in charge of 7 remaining soldiers. There was 13 privates, 6 of them were now dead. That left with 7, but 3 of them were wounded. York worked his way into position to silence the German machine guns. He recalled that the machine guns were spitting fire and cutting down the undergrowth all around him. The Germans were yelling orders. He couldn't quite understand. "You never heard such a racket in all of your life," he said. There was no time to dodge behind a tree or dive behind a bush or put your head down. As soon as the machine guns opened fire, he had to shoot back. There were over 30 Germans that were in continuous action, and all he could do was touch the Germans off just as fast as he could. Luckily for him, he was a sharpshooter. All the time he kept yelling at them to come down. He didn't want to kill any more of them than he had to. He said it was either them or him. He was giving the best he had. During the assault, 6 German soldiers in the trench near York had charged him with fixed bayonets. I want to make a joke about charging in Battlefield 1, but I am going to refrain myself from saying it. York had fired all the rounds of his M19-17 Enfield rifle, and then drew his M1911 automatic pistol. He had shot all 6 soldiers before they could reach him. German First Lieutenant Paul Jorgen Vollmer, commander of the 1st Battalion, 28th Light Infantry, emptied his pistol trying to kill York while he was contending with the machine guns, failing to injure York and seeing him mounting losses. He offered the English to surrender the unit to York, who accepted. By the end of the engagement, York and 7 men marched 132 German prisoners back to the American line. Upon returning to his unit, York reported to his brigade commander, who remarked, "Well, York, I hear you have captured the whole damn German army." York replied, "No, sir, I only got 132. His actions silenced the German machine guns and were responsible for enabling the 328th Infantry to renew its attack and capture the railroad." York was promptly promoted to sergeant and received the Distinguished Service Cross. A few months later, an investigation by York's chain of command resulted in an upgrade of his Distinguished Service Cross to the Medal of Honor, which he was presented by the commanding general of the American Expeditionary Forces, General John J. Pershing. The French Republic had awarded him with the Croix de Guerre, if I even pronounced that right, which is awarded to people of the French army, the French military, or its allies for gallantry. And he was also awarded the Legion of Honor. The Legion of Honor is the highest French order for military and civil merits. It actually traces its back pretty far back to Napoleon, so you can say that what he had accomplished was quite astounding. When being decorated York with the Croix de Guerre, Marshal Ferdinand Foch told York, "What you did was the greatest thing ever accomplished by any soldier, by any of the armies of Europe." In addition to his French medals, Italy awarded York with the Cross al Merito di Guerra, and Montenegro had decorated him with the War Medal. He eventually received nearly 50 decorations. In attempting to explain his actions during the 1919 investigation that resulted in the Medal of Honor, York told General Lindsay, "A higher power than man guided and watched over me and told me what to do." Lindsay replied, "York, you're right." After the war in the 1920s, York formed the Alvin York Foundation. His mission was to increase educational opportunities in its region of Tennessee. York suffered some health problems after the war throughout his life. He ended up having some surgeries, and in 1945 and in 1948 he had a stroke. More strokes and other cases of pneumonia followed, and he was confined to bed in 1954, unfortunately becoming handicapped and failing eyesight was upon him. York died at the Veterans Hospital in Nashville, Tennessee on September 2nd, 1964. A funeral service in Jamestown Church with General Matthew Ridgway representing President Lyndon Johnson. York was buried at the Wolf River Cemetery in Pall Mall. And that is just one of the many stories told in World War I. This was, of course, one of the most famous cases, as not many soldiers managed to take out an entire battalion of German soldiers pretty much by himself. It was 13 on 200, and he managed to capture every German that was there. This was not all for nothing, of course, because the US lines could actually push through without the worry of machine gun fire, and is regarded as one of the most heroic acts ever to be accomplished by any single person. Anyways, that's been it for me. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next video.
Begins a random chunks of light, remind me of what is true. But right now the ocean's black and black, the sky is blue.